I was staying in a house built to suggest openness, high ceilings, pale stone floors, and broad windows facing a garden of eucalyptus. In this kind of architecture, nothing seemed hidden because everything was glass. Yet the arrangement felt watchful, as if the house itself was waiting for something to happen. My hosts were an affluent couple. The husband was athletic and moved with a practiced ease, though he smiled without warmth. The woman was different. She carried an almost violent femininity. She didn't appear to be seducing anyone. She appeared simply to exist, and that very existence functioned as a seduction. I desired her immediately, and I knew immediately that she was another man's wife. For most of my life, I treated certain rules like this central pillar. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife wasn't decoration or piety, it was architecture. It held up my part of the world, standing outside my mood or appetite. I acted with care. At dinner, I answer her words, not the mouth that formed them. When she crossed the room, I looked at a painting or a bowl of pears. I knew well how desire announces itself when the body is perfectly still, and I knew how to disguise that announcement. Relying on a rigid external rule creates vulnerability. It prepares you to resist theft or force, but it provides no defense against a host who offers you wine and gives you permission. Later, she found me in the library. She didn't approach, she simply stood in the doorway and diagnosed my behavior. She told me I was very disciplined, that I was very careful not to want what I wanted. When I mentioned her husband's trust, she smiled. She said, "My husband knows me." That sentence hung in the dark paneled room. It implied a husband who sees, a husband who permits, and a husband with no objection. This shift changed the internal logic. If the husband knew, the moral fact changed. There was no victim. I reframed desire as a modern arrangement. This intelligent reasoning dismantled my adherence to the commandment, allowing me to step into a borderless void without law. The house seemed to arrange us together over the following days. At breakfast, she laughed at something I hadn't said aloud, and her husband looked up at the same instant, as if they both heard the same hidden sound. I dismissed these signs. Desire makes poor use of evidence. When sophisticated concepts like mutual consent are used to bypass ethical boundaries, they can turn a person's own intelligence against their conscience. That evening, all the careful distances I had maintained collapsed. I followed her upstairs to a room with white sheets and a garden that fell away into darkness. The force of the desire was like being overtaken by weather. Then the door opened. The husband stood there, smiling. She whispered that it was all right, but a word came from a place deeper than thought. I said, "No." A second atmosphere entered the first. The lamps still burned, and the sheets were still white, but the true room pressed outward. The beauty remained, but something behind their faces stepped forward. They were not two people, but two masks worn by one presence. One intelligence looked through both sets of eyes. The invitation was never pleasure, it was surrender. They didn't want my body. They wanted the moment I ceased to belong to myself. The entity demanded that I call this surrender freedom. It wanted me to enter the lie willingly, to accept a desecration of the soul and label it as a game. The goal of this encounter was the capture of consent. If I yielded, I would not merely be degraded, I would be devoured by the will of the thing standing before me. I spoke as calmly as I could. I told them that close friends knew the address, and they knew how long I expected to stay. If I disappeared, they had the resources, financial and legal, to ensure it didn't stay hidden. The spell required an enclosed room and a vacuum of secrecy. By introducing the threat of outside accountability, I punctured the isolation. Something behind their eyes flickered, the sudden calculation of a predator whose secrecy has been compromised. The husband stepped away from the door. I moved through the room with the care of a man in a room full of sleeping snakes. Their stillness was worse than movement. I could feel their desire to absorb and erase gathering in the air between them. I unlocked the front door and stepped out. The night air struck my face, cold and clean. I didn't look back until reaching the road. Survival meant breaking the artificial reality they had constructed. When a predator creates a world where the only rules are the ones they permit, the only way out is to reconnect with the world outside the room. The house stood on the hill above me, all glass and light. It shone as if nothing evil could ever live there. It still looked beautiful, civilized, and affluent. I realized then that the commandment, "Thou shalt not covet," functions as a warning about perception. Coveting doesn't just desire the forbidden. It blinds the soul to the nature of the invitation. It keeps you from seeing that the glow around the doorway is fire, not light. We expect the face of a monster, but the most effective trap uses hospitality. It welcomes you in, pours you wine, and waits for you to mistake consent for absolution. Only when you say no does the mask divide. Only then do you understand that the host was never offering pleasure. He was waiting for you to worship.